All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. My name is Daniel Trinham. I will be your host for this episode as always, and I'm really excited for today's episode. I was briefly talking with my guest before we started this episode, and I could be wrong, but I believe that this is the a first for the show. This is the first episode where I've had the privilege of speaking with someone who is a musician. They have produced a album and currently have an album coming up soon, and so I'm really excited to speak with my guest today. My guest today is Ethan Setiawan. I believe I said that correctly, and I am really excited to speak with him today. He seems like an awesome guy and someone who is very talented from the work I have gotten to listen to so far. So, Ethan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. So, if you don't mind, just give a little bit of background about yourself. Obviously, if I haven't mentioned it yet, but you do primarily mandolin style bluegrass music. But obviously, there's more to it than just you playing a mandolin. So, just give a little bit of background about you, who you are, what you do, and how you kind of got to where you are today, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally. I am a mandolinist, like Daniel said, and I live in Maine. I play with several bands, one called Corner House and one called the Acoustic Nomads. Those are my two kind of main touring projects. But a big thing that I've been working on for the past couple years is a new record of tunes of mine, tunes that I wrote and then played with a great band of folks up here in Maine. Actually, we recorded it here just down the road from my house, and yeah, that's kind of my wheelhouse. Just got home from a run of shows with my band, and you're catching me between another run going back out on Thursday for a couple more shows over the weekend. Um, yeah, that's kind of my deal. I run around and play mandolin, and I do a lot of recording work and teach quite a bit too. So yeah, kind of a whole bag of things to make up the world that I live in.
That's awesome, dude. That's awesome. How long have you been playing mandolin? I guess I'll say professionally, but just also in totality. Like, when would you first pick it up, and what about it really struck you as like, oh, this is. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different instruments, and from when I read kind of before this, you dabbled in different instruments leading up to you playing the mandolin. But how long did you play? Have you been playing the mandolin, and what about it specifically were you attracted towards? I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I started playing mandolin when I was 13. I first picked it up then. I played cello before that,
Mhm.
and I like playing the cello. I still play a little bit and teach every once in a while. But it's kind of funny. I wanted to play something that had frets. I was interested in
Mhm.
folk music
Mhm.
in a lot of different ways. I was kind of curious about American folk music and sort of the Celtic British Isles folk music as well. So that was kind of the impetus to get into something with frets that you play with a pick.
Mhm.
And I played some guitar and I played some banjo and some mountain dulcimer, some ukulele, kind of all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but mandolin is kind of the one that stuck, and sort of my journey to playing it professionally started out. I was just really interested in learning tunes and going to old time jams, going and learning tunes by ear, practicing them over the week, coming back the next jam session and playing the tunes again.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess around the time that I was 16 or 17, I started to play gigs,
Mhm.
play dances, or go and travel for shows or whatever
Yeah.
it was. And then I went to school out here in the Northeast in Boston at the Berklee College of Music. I went there for a degree and kind of stayed out here. Moved up north to Maine a couple years ago, and I've been here playing and working and hanging out.
So you've been playing since you were like in your teens, easily. Like, is that when you said you had your first gig when you were like 16 or 17?
Yeah, yeah. I wonder when that first gig was. It was probably a dance. There's a contra dance in Goshen in Indiana where I grew up, and I played that pretty early on with some friends and sort of some teacher mentor figures.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know when the first gig was. That's a good question, actually.
Do you remember anything from that first gig? Like, I mean, obviously that's many years back, but for me, I don't play any musical instruments. I tried to learn to play the guitar whenever I was younger. I forget how long I practiced, but I had a guy try to, he gave me lessons. And back when I played, I would tell you the reason why I wasn't great at it was because my hands were too big. That's what I always said. But the reality is I just didn't practice it enough. That was the reality. But I could play Hotel California. That was the one song like I could play the beginning of it. I'm sure there's a lot of people that could play it. But
Awesome.
I was very proud of my ability to play Hotel California. And I will never forget playing it the first time in my little hometown. There's this little event that goes on every fall. It's called Pumpkin Town. And I played it then. And I still remember being up there playing the beginning of it. And I was like, I am just at that moment, I was like, this is the best. Like I am the center of this tiny little event right now, but it just felt awesome. And so God, that's been who knows how long ago. But do you remember your first time like ever stepping up on a stage or kind of being in front of a crowd, whether it's large or small, and having the spotlight on you like that? And what was it like for you?
Yeah, actually, now that you say that, I do. I kind of remember a time like that. I worked at my library, my local library.
Uh-huh.
I shelved books, and there was sort of this committee of like teenagers that they talked to, and kind of were part of sort of a sounding board for events at the library. Um, I am a big nerd, obviously, and
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong
yeah,
with that. As I'm
totally.
getting older, I think that in a lot of ways the nerds kind of have it figured out. Whenever I was younger, I don't know if I would have had admitted that, but as I'm getting older, I definitely find that to be more true. So no shame in that at all.
Totally. No, we had a good time. We had a great time. But what was the event? We put on some kind of event for like youth at the library. So, and maybe it was sort of like Halloween or fall themed. It was
Hmm.
in the fall, I think. So it was kind of like dark, and there
Hmm.
were decorations and such. And I
Hmm.
did music. I did music with this guy who played guitar,
Yeah.
and that felt like it felt really good. It felt like sort of a real gig.
Yeah.
And so we went and we kind of had a little set worked up, and went and played, and yeah, it's really fun memory.
So now that you're, however many years removed from that experience, one, did you ever see yourself like, I mean, you just said you got back from, kind of playing around some different shows, and I don't know how far out you traveled and how, big of a like an expansive I guess I'll say tour you're planning on going on, but did you ever imagine yourself kind of being in the point now where making music and using the mandolin and the way you like this thing that you fell in love with at such a young age, that it was something that you could not only continue to do but make a large part of who you are, and like do this professionally, like on stages in front of crowds and making albums for people to hear and selling it and have it, like with all the kind of bells and whistles that come with this industry? Did you ever realistically see yourself being in this position at all?
I mean, it was definitely always the dream.
Mm-hmm.
It was always the goal, and it is definitely really encouraging to see it working
Mm-hmm.
out. I mean, I still don't make a ton of money. It's still kind of a bit of a grind. But yeah, I just got back from a really fun weekend out in New York State, um, and yeah, it's been really busy, which is also a sign that it's working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's been kind of exhaustingly busy. I just got back from my seventh of 8 weekends away from home in a row,
Wow.
and but that does mean something's working, which is really
Yeah.
encouraging and really heartwarming to see.
Yeah. You bring up something interesting that I was looking forward to asking you about. I did an interview a couple weeks ago. I don't know, when by the time this comes out, when exactly that will be, but and then for most of my life, like I told you that, I played guitar when I grew up, but I was never a conventionally artistic or creative person. I remember I had a friend growing up that you could give him a piece of paper and be like, "Hey, I want you to draw this thing," and he could just like in 10 minutes draw anything in great in great detail. And I was like, I don't understand how you can do that. I never was like the most artistic traditional person. I didn't paint or really. I took art class in high school, but I just kind of followed directions. Like it wasn't anything spectacular. And so this show right now is kind of the first time I've ever really created something for
Mm.
myself. Like I've had an idea for something, had a vision for it, and have executed on it and turned it into a real tangible thing. And with that in mind, I recently read a book. Do you know who Rick Rubin is?
Yeah, that's familiar. You have to remind me who exactly
So
he is.
if you look him up, he looks like a wizard. He has a big old
Yeah.
white beard, long white hair, but he founded Def Jam Records back in the I don't even know what decade.
Yeah.
But he's been working in the music industry for a long, long time. He's helped produce a lot of really famous albums by a lot of different genre, like a lot of different artists and genres. But anyways, I say that to say he's been working in music for a long time,
Mm.
and he recently wrote a book, and it was all about just his experience over the years and different takeaways he's had. And something about it that really struck me, at least at this point in my life, and I feel like you might have a similar feeling, is that I think a lot of times if you're looking at any kind of creative endeavor, whether it be making music like you're doing, or it's creating a show, or you're making, like a painting or anything, it can be hard to quantify. We can only view success, or like you said, it
Yeah.
working out, quote unquote, as, oh, is it making money, or is it about to make money, or is it paying the bills, and am I profiting from it monetarily speaking? And that is
Mm.
certainly one aspect of it. Like, I'm not going to act like money isn't an aspect, because we all have bills to pay, we all have food we need to eat, and we all have a house that we need to have above our heads. But
Totally.
he raised a really great point that you have to define what success looks like for you with whatever creative endeavor you're pursuing. Maybe you are a musical artist, maybe you're a painter, but if you're starting from scratch, making money may not necessarily be what a successful endeavor looks like. It may just be simply making the art. It may be going on and doing shows like you're doing. For me, like with this show, success for me right now is the fact that I get to do this and have these cool conversations with people like yourself, across the world. Like, this is awesome. So, whether I make money on it or not right now, I don't really care. I get to do something really fun and put it out there for the world to hear. And so I say all of that to say, at this point in your career and at this point in your life where you're going, you're going out and you're playing shows, you're traveling, you're with your bandmates, and it's really starting to kind of gain some traction. What for you does success and it working out look like for you? Obviously, there's a financial aspect of it, but how do you look at what you're doing and where you are currently in your career and think, I'm doing something correct, what I'm doing is working, and it currently is successfully working out for me? Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think about this a lot. Kind of the term music industry is sort of an oxymoron to me, because
Mhm.
how do you make a business or an industry out of any art form?
Mhm.
It's kind of like cognitively dissonant to me. Um which is kind of a whole nother can of worms with how the
Hey, we
industry
got time. You
works,
can
and
open it if you want
how
to.
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's big. I think about it a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously nice to make money. We all have to make money at some point. But we've had a bunch of really nice shows recently, um, where there's a couple things happening. The band is really in a good place. Everyone's listening really attentively, and everyone's sort of uh, saying yes to what other people are saying on stage musically, which is a really fun place to be, where we can all kind of take risks and step outside of our comfort zones and really play the music. Um, and when that lines up with a really attentive, appreciative audience that is really into the music and listens attentively, listens to what's happening, and hopefully we bring some joy to them. That feels really good
Mhm.
when that happens. That would be the success in my
Yeah.
book, when we can
Yeah.
really get there.
And I think and I love that, because I think that obviously I'm speaking from my own perspective, and my lens of a creative success is different from everybody else's. But I think that if you can get to a point where you can define that success for yourself, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're making music or you're just whatever thing it is that you're doing, if you can define success for yourself and whatever that looks like, it makes the act of doing it, kind of the grind of it all, very, very, it's much more uh it's much easier to go through. For me,
Mm.
I started at least for me, whenever I started the show, like I was starting from scratch. I had people like that knew me on social media and stuff, but I was by no means like famous or anything, and I'm still very much not. But um I was starting from scratch, and I knew that if my goal was to be the biggest host in the world, or to make this X amount of dollars from this show, I probably was going to flame out, because the reason why I'm doing this is not so I can become the biggest host, or so I can become
Yeah.
filthy rich off the show. It's because I really enjoy having conversations with unique people. And if I get to do that, and if people enjoy it and hear it, and that's, if all those things happen, then in my mind, everything else will work out. Obviously, right now I'm in a position where I have a day job, so I'm not like
Mhm.
my finances aren't hinged on this necessarily, but I'm in a position where if I can do that, that's a successful picture for me. And that makes going through the times where maybe an interview doesn't happen, maybe an interview doesn't go well, maybe
Mhm.
an episode I put out doesn't do as well as I'd hope. Whatever happens, it makes those days a lot easier to go through. And I think if
Sure.
you can define that for yourself, it makes the process of the creation of whether it be a show or an album or a song or a painting or whatever, it makes that process of creation so much easier and so much more joyful to go through. That's been my experience, at least. And I don't know, I've been
Totally.
thinking a lot about that since I read that book. And I probably heard other people say that before, but for whatever reason, when he wrote it in the book and a big man with a white beard and long white hair says it, I guess it means a little bit more to me.
Yeah, it's kind of sort of the whole idea too about there's no destination, only the journey, right?
Mm-hmm,
We're just on our individual journeys, and
mm-hmm,
that's the whole point,
mm-hmm.
just kind of being on the journey and seeing where it takes you rather than having the end goal in mind, whatever
Yeah.
that may be.
Yeah. And speaking of, I always love a good, who doesn't love a good segue? Speaking of destinations and journeys, you are about to come up upon I guess, a destination of sorts. You have a new album coming out. And so, for one, so correct, the album is called Gambit. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when is it coming out? At least as the time of this recording.
Yes, coming out on March 31st of 2023.
Nice. So right now at this very moment, how are you feeling just leading? I mean, there's still a couple more, let's see, looking over my calendar, there's 2 or 3 weeks leading up until then, but how are you feeling about the album right now, just as you're coming up on the official release date of the album with a couple singles out?
Yeah, I'm feeling really good. I'm really stoked about how the music turned out,
Mhm.
which is which is good, with putting out
That's
new
always a
album.
good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very excited just to have it out in the world and kind of,
Yeah.
again, uh, journeys are good. And this album has had quite the long journey. We actually recorded it back in 2020 in the
Wow.
fall. So it's
Wow.
kind of been sitting here. We
It
took,
was a
I
pandemic
mean,
project.
pandemic project for sure. Yeah, yeah. So I'm busy. Yeah. So these are all tunes that I wrote that are sort of sectioned into this solo project,
Hmm.
and I don't really tour as a solo artist all that
Hmm.
often. I'm doing a couple shows
Hmm.
around the album release, and I think I'll do a couple more runs this year. But most of my touring is with bands, with sort of
Hmm.
individual projects.
Yeah.
So yeah, just with all that stuff happening around me, it's been a little while to get it out, get it finished, mixed and mastered, and artwork and all the bits and bobs that you have to tie up to put a record out in the world.
Hmm.
So very excited to have it out, and I think that it's had some good reception, which is always nice to have people listen to the records. And um yeah, just very stoked to get it out in the world.
So now that you are coming up on this destination, kind of looking back at the journey of it so far, to use these words we've been tossing back and forth, what was you said you started it back in 2020 or so. Looking back on the journey you've taken to get to this point, what was your headspace like following the
Hmm.
release and completion of your first album and then kind of journeying into this next endeavor of your second album? What was your headspace like going into this? Just with a new project in mind and new ideas. What was it like for you going into this project?
Totally. So my first solo record, which is called Flux, came out. It was recorded in 2017, came out in 2018, and I really feel like I learned a lot from the making of that record. Um, it was the first record that I had, put together completely on my own
Mhm,
without bandmates or
mhm,
collaborators. So I wrote all the tunes. That's not true. There's one traditional tune. I wrote almost all the tunes, arranged them all, rehearsed the band, kind of produced the session in a big way. Didn't have another producer involved. So just us, just the band doing it,
mhm,
which was a huge learning experience in and of itself. But then there's all the publicity, marketing, trying to get some press, trying to get all the artwork, get everything together for print and
mhm,
stuff like that.
mhm,
um and then that also culminated in playing a run of shows then. So it was kind of the launch of sort of, trying to lead something, to
Hmm.
see a project from start to finish,
Hmm.
oversee it on my own. Um, and musically, it really helped a lot. I feel like writing tunes really crystallizes sort of your core musical vision. It kind of forces you to put something down on paper and say, this is what I want to say musically
Hmm.
from a compositional standpoint.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to play a solo. I improvise a lot, so all the solos in the records are improvised, stuff like that.
Really? That's
Yeah.
cool.
So, but the tunes are not, right. The tunes are
Yeah.
composed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so with improvising, people say that improvising is composing sped up, or vice versa,
Hmm.
which I think is true to a large degree. But with that in mind, if you're composing a tune that's going to hang around for a long time, you think a lot about each note, really,
Hmm.
and to really try to focus sort of the essence of the tune
Hmm.
into the melody, into the whatever you write down
Yeah.
that makes up the tune.
Hmm.
And then the really joyful part of that for me is you have this tune, which is really fun. It's really fun to write tunes as well. I love doing that. But you write the tunes, and then you take some of your favorite musicians and say, what do you want to do with this?
Hmm.
And you hear what everybody wants to say over your tune, which is a really fun moment for me to hear everyone else's take on what I'm
Hmm.
thinking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, so definitely learned a lot. Definitely making a record is really helpful for making records in the future.
So when you say like creating a tune, is this for you? It may be different each time. Does this process for you look like, you're putting, like, in my mind, again, I am no musician by any means, so I'm operating from a place of a lot of ignorance here. But
No,
if
it's
if
great. It's
you're
really refreshing to kind of talk about this stuff with just in basic creative terms. It's really
yeah,
really great.
yeah. But like for you, is it whenever you're creating a song or you have an idea for an album or an idea for a song or whatever it is it more like kind of class in my mind, like a classical structure, like, okay, I'm going to put this note here, and then the note that follows this note is going to be this note? Or is it more like a little bit freeform, I guess I'll say? Like, for instance, is your creation of your songs like you'll be walking out in the park or in the streets, and you hear something and it reminds you of a chord, and that chord makes you think of the different, chord structure beyond that? Like, what is the process of creating this like generally for you?
Yeah, I think I use a bunch of different techniques, including the two that you mentioned, basically to kind of pull melodies out of the air or
Mhm.
out of my brain. I've definitely heard, been walking down the street, and the subconscious is always working to with whatever you're thinking
Mhm.
about, whatever you're learning. And so if you're walking down the street and you hear a snippet of melody in your head, and I
Mhm.
sing it into my phone, and then go home and play it on the
Yeah.
mandolin or whatever. um I do some exercises. Sometimes I try to like take a tune that I really like, and sort of distill it down
Mhm.
to the element that is really engaging to me, and
Mhm.
then try to write a tune involving that element.
Mhm.
I do things like that quite a bit. Sometimes I just sit down and improvise and record myself, and maybe there's something that comes out of that, some
Mhm.
kind of seed that I can take and develop from that improvisation. Um, yeah, just kind of trying to find different ways to jog the brain to get creativity out of myself.
When you recorded Gambit, was it largely in like it, you said you're currently in Maine? Did it largely take place in like a studio where you're at, or was it over different locations, or what was the actual like physical location like for you?
Yeah, we recorded it at this studio called Great North Sound Society, which is actually just 20 minutes from my house. Really great studio, really fun to be at.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. We had 4 days with kind of the core band there. The core band is myself on mandolin, and this fiddle player Daryl Anger, who also produced it,
Mm-hmm.
and my friend Sam Leslie playing guitar, and my friend Brittany Carlson playing bass. And that's kind of the quartet that provides the bedrock for most of the record.
Mm-hmm.
And we had different folks come in for a day throughout the course of the session to do for some tracks that involved more people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so recorded 13 tracks. There are 13 tracks in the record, and basically all of their foundations were recorded in that session.
Hmm.
And I overdubbed a couple things. Daryl overdubbed some things. We sent it to a couple other musicians to overdub on it.
Hmm.
Um, but the majority of it was created, kind of in the space of about a week
Hmm.
at the studio.
Yeah. So the reason why I bring that up is I was the other day I was listening to an interview. Do you know who Tame Impala is? The
Yeah,
artist
yeah.
slash band. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Parker, the
Mm.
the joke of like, oh, did you know Tame Impala was only one person? Kevin Parker, the guy behind Tame Impala, he was doing an interview, and it was around the time when his most recent album came out, and the guy had asked him about kind of what it was like for him during the recording process. And he was talking about how, a lot of times musicians they'll go to places that are beautiful. They'll go to these different
Yeah.
locations to record their albums. And he was talking about how it was either with his most recent album or one of his past albums. When he recorded it, he deliberately like recorded it and wrote it in like a shack in just like an empty room
Yeah.
somewhere. And he said the reason for that was, if you're like by the beach, that you can strum a guitar and just a couple notes, and whatever you play is going to be beautiful because you're by the beach, and that in company with the beach is great. But he wanted to challenge himself to make something that on its own, regardless of the circumstances where you were, he felt like it was good and it was worthy of listening to. And I thought that
Mm.
was interesting, thinking about like the actual location, the physical geography of where you're at, how that may manipulate and alter and change and inspire the music that you create. And so obviously you're up in Maine, and actually, fun fact, I'll be going to Maine soon on vacation with my family to Acadia National Park. So I'm
Oh,
excited
great.
to, for the first time, to be up there. Looking forward to that. But from what I've seen and heard, it's a beautiful place, and it just looks, I don't know what part of Maine you're in, but it looks like an awesome place. And so, to you, from what you can tell, how do you think just the physical location and the geography and the land around you and kind of the environment that you recorded and came up with these songs and try different kinds of music, how do you think it impacted and influenced the sound that you ultimately settled on and created with Gambit?
Yeah, I think the environment influences at least my musical creation in a big way. I wrote a bunch of the tunes outside. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a bunch of the tunes
That's cool.
while on tour in California or on tour in Michigan.
Mhm.
Those are two that I can really think of right now.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of on the flip side of that, a bunch of them are pandemic tunes, are kind of
Mhm.
like spring 2020 tunes
Mhm.
where I was literally, inside
Mhm.
for months.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, I had a lot of time to practice, which was really great. Practice and write.
Yeah.
Um, but it's definitely your environment, but you can create yourself an environment that is
Mhm.
inspiring, kind of
Mhm.
regardless of locale. But that being said, being at the studio, Great North Sound, it's pretty out in the woods. It's quite far from large roads, stores, that kind of thing. And